a beautiful night in the hood. It's a beautiful night in the hood. Gonna be hanging out in the hood.
Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown.
I'm Mark.
And this is Gordon, and we love talking about baseball. It's kind of interesting because you wouldn't think it would happen too much in baseball, but it actually happens a lot in that you get guys that come out and have just an unbelievable single season, and then they just never touch that plateau again. And what's even more interesting is a lot of them do it in their rookie season. Now, granted, for a lot of these guys, I think injuries kind of play a part in this, but it is interesting how like you have these guys win the Rookie of the Year and then they just vanish into obscurity after that.
And you know, the natural thing to think about that now when you say that is that, well, the league figured them out, right? So if you're a hitter, the league figured out how to get you. But how did you not figure the guy out the entire season when he had this season that was unlike any other season he had?
Exactly. Like you're going to really tell me that somehow the entire league in the course of the offseason, all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, that's what we need to do to get
Pass
this
the
guy.
notes around. Okay, we got how to pick
Now
for this
we got
guy.
that. Yeah, exactly. No, like my guess is that it's more likely that either in a lot of these cases, it could be something like that. Like the guy had some kind of obvious, like, oh, he just actually can't hit a curveball. So we just have to only throw him curveballs. Like I could see that happening for some hitters. Or like guys realize like, oh, okay, that pitcher that had that really nasty pitch, he can't actually throw it for a strike.
I don't know if he's on your list. He's not on my list, but Rick Ankiel would kind of qualify almost as one of these guys.
But the problem for Ankiel is he came back and had solid seasons at other positions. So he like the thing with a one season wonder is you really had to have just that one unbelievable year. And we're going to try. There's a couple guys I think that'll come up throughout this as we're going to start going through the names here that, you know, you could argue that, you know, they did have another good year or two somewhere in their career, but it was never like what they did. So I kind of want to start off with like one of the more obvious examples because everybody knows him because he was such a character. And that was Mark Fidrich.
The Bird.
The Bird. I mean, unbelievable rookie season, 19-9, 234 ERA.
I think he started the All-Star game.
Won the Rookie of the Year. I mean, and he was such a guy, like he's the kind of person that was such a character. People talked about him all the time because he was talking to the ball on the mound. He was weird.
Yeah. He would say things to the ball like, okay, you're going to go to your spot right now. You know, outwardly talking to the ball on the mound. Who knows what the players thought he was, he was doing that.
And Fidrich, it's like, I feel a little cheap including him as the first guy because injuries were such a derailment to his career. But it wasn't like he was ever effective in any like the other starts that he had. It wasn't like he was showing flashes in the pan and injuries were just keeping him from competing. It didn't really seem like that.
Yeah. And he, I didn't look at his career WAR, but he didn't pitch long enough really to have.
He only pitched 27 more games over the next 4 seasons before he retired just because he couldn't handle it due to injuries.
So my guy I'm going to go with first is a guy we talked about before, and I noticed that his career WAR is 32.3, which is pretty good.
Actually, yeah, it's not bad, but it's the kind of thing where like one really good season and a bunch of accumulation will get you up there.
Well, and it's interesting, and I think this will be a theme also. A lot of these seasons I noticed, and some of the guys we're going to talk about, happened around 2000.
There's a lot of guys right in that like 1990 to 2000. There were a ton of these.
And so there were things going on at that time in baseball that
I wonder what.
So, Darren Erstad had a season in the year 2000 for Anaheim, and that was 2 years before they went to the World Series. He had 240 hits, which is by far the most hits by a major leaguer in a very long time. And he had a 951 ops. He hit 25 homers. Darren Erstad never hit more than 19 homers in any other season. He had 100 RBIs. He had 28 steals. He never had a season like that again.
The guy had an unbelievable career. But, like, there's a lot of unbelievable seasons. But there are a bunch of guys like that. Like, how many catchers in the history of the major leagues do you think have hit 300 and hit 30 home runs in the same season?
Boy, there aren't very many that I can think of. Besides Yogi Berra might have done it a couple of times.
Piazza might have done it.
Yeah.
There's 4.
Okay.
Now, I don't know all of them, but I know one of them. And I know you will not guess his name. Rick Wilkins.
Rick Wilkins.
Chicago Cubs catcher in 93 hit 303 and 30 home runs. He only had one more double-digit home run the rest of his season, the rest of his career, and he never got close to 300 again.
I remember the player being associated with the Cubs, but you're right. I never
You
would
would
have
have
got
never
this guy.
guessed that.
Never.
Like, who was this guy? He just had one unbelievable season. Obviously, the prime example from the 90s, if you think about like having that one wild season, is Brady Anderson.
Right. I think he's the one that I always think of because he hit those 50 home runs and never. What was the most he had aside from the 50?
21.
Really?
No, the 21 in the previous 8 seasons was the highest he had ever had.
Right.
24 was the highest after that point.
Right. 50. So he had more than twice as many home runs in his best season. That's just weird. What year was that?
That was the 1996 season. He hit 297, drove in 110, hit 50 homers.
So that's kind of at the beginning of when.
And of course, what immediately followed that season? A bunch of accusations.
Yeah, absolutely. Didn't, and he just killed the ball. I mean, he had a lot of home runs early in the season. So I think he is one of those sort of poster children for, having that season that, you could never understand.
And then but then even then there are still interesting guys. Like, would you believe there was a Pirate second baseman in 1999 that as a rookie worked his way into the lineup, batted .288, hit 15 homers, 20 doubles, and 73 RBIs. He was out of the majors 5 years later.
And this player?
Warren Morris.
Warren Morris. I would not have gotten.
He had 11 RBIs the rest of his career.
So what happened that year?
Like, think about that. He had an unbelievable rookie season and then just gone.
So, for Yankee fans, and you just mentioned the name Kevin Moss, and you think, oh, yeah, I remember that 1 year, and it wasn't even a full season. Kevin Moss came up in the middle of the season and hit 28 home runs. 23 home runs for the Yankees in 91. And he had 21 in 90 and 23 in 91. And he came up and he hit 252 and he thought in 90 that he was going to be this big star. He was the guy that was going to sort of, take over hitting down and he only played 79 games and had 21 home runs that season. Okay. And he played 148 games the next year and he had 23 home runs and he batted .220. And yeah, that was kind of it because after that, he batted .248 and hit 11 homers in 98 games. He hit .205 and he was out of the league 5 years is all he lasted in the major leagues.
It's wild that you could come up that insanely hot and then just gone. So they were talking about him being like the next Mattingly, basically.
Right. He was that well thought of.
And I mean, even the year before, there was another Rookie of the Year winner in Jerome Walton of the Cubs.
I remember that season for Jerome Walton, and he was going to be a star.
And then he was just a middling player at best and retired about 9 years later.
So one of the great rookie years of all time, and I'm not looking at which year it was. I'll think of a second. I think it was in that late 70s, might have been 79. And he was an exciting player that season for the Cleveland Indians. And it was 1980, Joe Charbonneau. Go Joe Charbonneau. And the Indians were not very good at this.
No, so I'm sure
having a player like
a rookie like that.
So he won the Rookie of the Year. He had 23 homers. He drove in 87, batted .289, had an 846 ops. And yeah, he only played 3 years, only played 48 games the next year, 22 the next year, all for Cleveland, out of baseball. Done.
Injuries.
So and just and they figured him out also. He just couldn't get back to the level he needed to be.
It wasn't all bad for him. He did manage to, make another piece of baseball history by appearing as an extra in The Natural.
That's right. I forgot about that. So we talk about Fernando Tatis Jr., but it was his dad, Fernando Tatis Sr., who had just like
one of the most wild seasons.
So I always thought the most notable thing about Tatis Sr. was him hitting 2 grand slams in the same inning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, certainly a weird thing to happen and something very special to remember. And in
that same season.
Right, in that same season, 1999, and so here it is again, like around the same time. He has 107 RBIs, 34 homers. He bats .298. 957 ops. Okay. You have to look at his career numbers because he played 11 years. He batted .265 for his career. He never had more than 18 home runs in any other season, never had more than 64 RBIs in any other season. Just that one season for the Cardinals, he went nuts.
And it's weird that there were 2 guys in the same division in the same year that did that because Warren Morris, the Pirates second baseman rookie, also did it in 99. that we talked about earlier.
Yeah,
it's weird.
Yeah, so, well, and again, all around this time of year, you had guys like the guy that I think we've all forgotten about. I don't even know if you know this player. So he played for the Giants, shortstop for the Giants mostly. I think he got traded later in his career. And he in 2001. Okay, so this is, and Barry Bonds is also on the Giants. So there's a little bit of having a guy like that in your line. You're going to maybe see more pitches to hit. And Rich Aurelia. Have you ever heard?
I have heard of Rich Aurelia. I thought he was a better player than that, but was it really just that one season in 2001?
Career WAR of 18 in 15 years. So that's not
That's
really
not good, especially when you're a one-season wonder, because you probably put up more than one WAR that season.
So he was an all-star only one time that season. He won the Silver Slugger one time that season. He had 206 hits that season. 37 home runs. 37. His highest ever was 23. Other than that, 97 RBIs with a 941 ops. I mean, that's he got MVP votes. Okay, and you just think, okay, this is it. Originally, the next year he hit 257 with 15 homers.
They're like, oh, a return to normalcy.
Yeah, right. And so he obviously had this off the chart season, and never was able to repeat it.
Now, this is one that I feel like it's a little cheating because he did make another All-Star game in a different season in his career. So I feel like it's tough to have a guy on this list that made All-Star games in two different seasons.
I had the same kind of problem with this. You're right.
But Esteban Loaiza's 2003 season for the White Sox is unbelievable. Dude went 21-9 with a 2.90 ERA and struck out 207 guys, led the majors in strikeouts.
Yeah.
And he was just a pretty good pitcher over the other four. Now, there was one other season in his career where he did make the All-Star team, but to have that one season where you were literally probably the best pitcher in the American League that season.
Right. And really, most people don't know who Esteban Loaiza is.
I didn't remember him until I started doing research for this.
But this guy you do know because he only got out of baseball after the 2018 season. And I did not realize that and I know he was a pretty good player. And on the basis of this one season, I think he got the big contract. He played third base for the Padres. And in 2012, he played in 161 out of 162 games.
I know who it is.
Who is it?
Chase Headley.
It is indeed Chase Headley, who had 31 home runs that season. He never had more than 14 in any other year.
Didn't he get the fat contract from the Yankees?
Yeah. No, the Padres paid him, and then he got traded to the Yankees. So he had
I knew he ended up there.
115 RBIs, 17 steals. He was fifth in the MVP. He won the Gold Glove, and he won the Silver Slugger.
So you were looking at this guy as like an up-and-comer. Like the Padres fans were looking at him as like they look at Tatis right now.
Right.
He was the savior.
But by far, and he played 12 years in the major leagues. That season outpaced any season. And he always thought he could get back to that level, and he just never really did as a hitter.
So this is somebody I didn't even know was a major league player. I had never heard of him before we started doing research for this, and that was 2012 All-Star once again for the Chicago Cubs, Brian LaHair.
Yeah. Well, because I think he had 2 seasons. That's why I looked at him. He had 2 seasons where he kind of did okay.
But he somehow managed to make the All-Star game in 2012.
Okay, right. That's the thing. Because no one's ever heard of him for the most part.
Because he had totaled 5 homers and 16 RBI over his previous 2 seasons. So, really breaking out there. But then he goes deep 16 times, drives in 40 while slugging 450 and gets named to the All-Star team. And then that also was his last season in the majors.
Yeah. Not quite, the.
So really what that tells me is I think the 2012 Cubs were really bad and they just needed somebody to go to the All-Star game.
Every team had to have a representative. I think you might be right something. So here's a guy you may have heard of, but you might know him more as a manager because he managed the world champion Blue Jays in the early 90s. You probably don't know if I don't tell you the name. Cito Clarence Gaston.
I've heard the name before, but probably because he was the manager for those Blue Jays teams.
So because I'm old, I remember Cito Gaston because he was an original San Diego Padre. I don't know why I remember this.
Because he managed a couple teams, didn't Gaston?
I just remember him managing the Blue Jays for sure and winning 2 World Series championships. And I don't know if he managed someplace else. He may have. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But, was a career WAR. Okay. And he got it in 11 seasons. So he got a pension of minus 0.8.
Ooh.
Okay. So
impressive that he managed to get 11 seasons.
So, but In 1970, which was the second year of the Pirates' existence, Cito Gaston plays 146 games, hits 29 homers, 93 RBIs. He bats .318 with a .907 ops. He has MVP votes. He's an all-star, and his career average ends up being .256. He hits 91 homers for his entire career.
So what do you think leads to guys having seasons like that?
Well, they weren't juicing back in 1970.
Right, exactly. So that wasn't it. So what happened that year for Gaston?
I assume he hit ahead of Winfield. In that lineup, yeah. So that probably helped. But that's and I guess he just had that. See, I don't know why a guy could go .318 with 29 homers one season. In 1971, he goes .228 and hits 7.
I would love to look at his batting average on balls in play for that season, because maybe it was just one of those wacky seasons
where everything found a place.
Everything found a place. Because I could see that happening. You have a super high batting average on balls in play, and you also just get a higher than average number of mistakes from pitchers. Like, pitchers just throw bad pitches to you more often that season for whatever reason, maybe because you're batting in front of Winfield, and that's how you have this unreal season that you really can never replicate again.
Yeah, I think, and speaking of replication, because I know you have a jersey of this player.
Oh, no. This is one of my most favorite possessions, because it's like something you can wear at Citi Field, and maybe like 15% of Met fans will know who this is referencing. They probably just think it's my name on the back of the jersey.
So, if you're a pitcher and you pitch 8 years in the majors and you have a career WAR of 4, you're just an average major league pitcher, I would say, at best.
You pitched 8 years in the majors.
You got 8 seasons in the major leagues. But in 2007, John Maine, who the Mets... that's
my senior year in high school.
Okay, John Maine comes to the Mets the year before, and that's the year the Mets choked in the end of the season, and it was horrible. Anyway, he goes 15-10, pitches to a .391, and has by far the best season. It was like 191 innings, and you really thought this guy was going to be a lead pitcher.
We were still operating back then when we were looking at pitchers by he's got all 3. He's got multiple pitches. Yep. He can locate pretty well. And then it was just like, so yeah, he'll be a good pitcher. It was like, oh no. What we moved into was, do you have stuff? John Maine did not have the stuff to dominate major league hitters. He had to pitch to them. And there's like maybe a handful of guys that can get away with just being pitchers in this era of baseball.
Yeah, and unfortunately for Maine, that one season wasn't quite enough to have the Mets reward him with a fat contract. One of the few times the Mets didn't do something like that.
And then he went off to the Giants, I believe, afterwards.
I think he went to the Marlins, actually.
Oh, wow, yeah, he really bounced around.
Yeah. So, no, he pitched, a few years for the Mets, but you had such hope that he was going to become a real...
You thought he was going to be like one of their big lineup pitchers going forward, and
didn't work out that way.
We did miss another Rookie of the Year.
And that would be
1994, Bob Hamlin of the Kansas City Royals.
Yeah. He had a hell of a season that year, as I recall.
24 homers, 65 RBIs, 282 average with an OPS of 987. It's pretty good.
Now, keep in mind, he had 67 career homers. So he hit almost half of them in that one season.
What's wild is he wins Rookie of the Year in 1994 for the Royals, and he is gone by 96.
Yeah, just, flame out.
Flame out, complete flame out. He ends up in Detroit. He hits 18 homers in 97 for Detroit, but then he's out of baseball the next season.
And there's been guys in the National League East that we've seen, 2 guys that I think kind of qualify in the same way. One guy for the Phillies, Dominic Brown, all right? And it's D-O-M-O. I remember, like how do you... Domonic Brown, who came up with the Phillies and had a pretty, middling start to his career. But in 2013, went out and hit 27 homers.
I remember that.
He had a .272. He was an all-star. And this wasn't his rookie year, so he had played a couple years in the major leagues.
And I remember Philly fans being like, he's finally figured out his talent.
Okay, and then he only played 2 more years in the major leagues, ended up hitting .235 and .228, and had 15 home runs in his last 2 seasons combined, and was out of baseball.
I wonder, I honestly would love for these one season wonders. I kind of regret not doing looking into their batting average on those balls in play, because I bet for a lot of these guys.
That's a great point.
I bet it's weird outlier seasons, and that's how you end up with this, because then you have like guys that have the seasons where like the really good career hitter randomly hits, like he's a career 300 hitter, and then one year he hits 270.
Right.
And you can't figure out why. And then you look, you're like, oh, okay, wait a second. He just got supremely unlucky an entire season.
Which
can
happens,
happen.
my guys. I think McNeil's having that kind of a year this year to a certain degree.
Where it's just like, I remember, I forget who it was for the Mets, but I remember there was one year where it was like, the dude just hit the ball hard every single time, and it was just right at somebody.
Yeah, got to listen to Wee Willie Keeler. Remember what he said?
Hit him where they ain't.
Hit him where they ain't. So in 2011, this Washington National, who had played 6-7 years in the major leagues, right, and had didn't really play that much before that. So he had only played 98 games with Washington in 2010. Before that, never more than 72 in his first 6 years. So Michael Morse plays 146 games in 2011, bats .303, has 31 homers, 95 RBIs, and gets MVP votes. Okay, and never for the rest of his career
Even approaches that.
Right, so he kind of has an okay season the next year with 18 homers and a batting average of .291 with 62 RBIs, and then it's just a straight downhill for the most part for the rest of his career. And he played 13 years in the major leagues, but that season just was so unlike any other season.
Any other season he had,
had.
with 330 home runs. You don't do that. Like, that's a good season.
So we also used to say that, and I don't know if it's really fair because he had a better career, and you didn't see him pitch because he pitched for those 86 Mets and had that season in 86 where he went 18-5, and that's Bobby Ojeda. And Bobby Ojeda, who also had the ignominy of cutting off the tip of his finger with a hedge trimmer when he was at home.
Like my 5th grade teacher. Well, he did that with like those like dividers between the classroom in the middle of the day. So I get where he's coming from.
So, but Bobby Ojeda had that season, and the Mets needed every single win. And really, for the rest of his career, and he pitched 15 years in the majors, never had a season where he was any better than 13-11 or 12-9. 18-5, 217 innings. He had, just did everything to help the Mets and was 4th in the Cy Young and got MVP votes that year. That's how good Bobby Ojeda's dead fish changeup was that particular season.
So I got one more. I got 2 more, actually. So I'm going to go to this guy. This was somebody I never saw play because he played before I was born and out of baseball before I was born. But he had a pretty unbelievable season in 1976 for the Baltimore Orioles. It looks like
Yeah, I think I know who this is.
Wayne Garland.
Wayne Garland, yes. Oh,
20-7, 2.67 ERA in over 38 games and 25 starts. It's still like one of the better pitching seasons in Major League history. Cleveland, next season as a free agent, gives him a 10-year deal worth $2.3 million.
And he did lead the league in a category that season, and when Cleveland brought him in the next year.
Home runs?
Nope, 19 losses.
Ooh. Yeah, he was out of baseball by 82.
So
that's a real Bobby Bonilla contract.
And he got hurt a lot, right? Because he just, he started 38 games in the season you mentioned, 76, where he had the good season.
Well, no, he played in 38 games. He only started 25.
Because he started 38 games the next year for Cleveland when he lost 19 games. And everybody said, he's pitched 282 innings.
In 2 seasons. This is a lot.
No, that season he pitched 282 innings.
Oh, God, that's way too many.
And that was it. The next season, 29 innings, 94. So probably arm problems. And they kind of figured him out.
And they overthrew him.
Who's your other guy?
Another rookie of the year. Now, granted, he had a good 2008 season, but he really never approached that rookie campaign. That is Oakland Athletic shortstop Bobby Crosby.
Bobby Crosby, yeah. He was a shame because he was a very good player, and injuries really robbed him.
And that was the thing is, like, he hit 22 homers, 34 doubles. He never hit more than 9 in another season. But it was just, he couldn't, because of those injuries, he was never able to be the player that he was in that rookie season.
Yeah, and like I said, we could do an episode on injured players, right? On guys that just never really were able to fulfill their potential because they just were hurt, but they had a few seasons that made you think, if this guy didn't.
I mean, there's
hurt,
even guys that did
Famer.
fulfill their potential that might be a Hall of Famer that you could wonder, like, what if a guy like Carlos Beltran didn't deal with nagging injuries his whole career?
Yeah, I think he's a Hall of Famer anyway.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. But that's what I'm saying about it. Like, even you have guys in the Hall of Fame, they're like, man, if he didn't have all those injuries, what would have he really been like? What if Griffey doesn't go to Cincinnati and fall off a cliff?
Yeah, and let's hope Mike Trout can come back full strength and all that, because his injury problems in recent seasons.
Honestly, there's probably
he's probably in anyway as well.
If I'm Mike Trout, you probably lucked out by getting injured this season when Ohtani shows up, because nobody's paying attention to the fact that you're not playing.
Right, exactly.
So it makes it a lot easier to just focus on your rehab,
not bringing him back. So the last guy I'll mention, and because we talk about Mets on this podcast all the time, of course, had his distinction with the Mets, and what makes him really not part of this group is he did it kind of over 2 seasons, but even the 1 season. And the Mets win the World Series in '86. Okay, and he is on the team, but really doesn't pitch at all. He pitches 6 games.
Yeah.
And so he's not really part of the team. 6 innings the whole year. But in 1987, when all the Met pitchers got hurt, which is one of the reasons why they were unable to return to the playoffs that season, he goes 11-1 out of the bullpen. So he pitches in 44 games, but starts 12 of them, 131 innings. And that 11-1 record was like ridiculously, like how does a reliever go? And the next season he goes 7-2. Okay, so he goes 18-3 over 2 seasons for the Mets. And at least in '88 they ended up going to the playoffs and losing to the Dodgers in the National League Championship Series. But he was 38-27 for his career, but 18-3 for those 2 seasons.
Who is this?
Right, Terry Leach.
You never heard of him.
Terry Leach. He had a sidearm slinging motion. And again, another guy who got his pitching 11 major league seasons. But those 2 seasons sort of stand out. And really that 1 season when he was 11-1, which people said, wow, that's one of the best pitchers. And it was just sort of good fortune for a good hitting team. And he was in the games at the right time for the most part.
So I'm going to bring up one more guy because he was a teammate of Terry's. And it's like, I want to bring up, is he a 1-season wonder? Not because the rest of his career was bad, but because that 1 season was so above anything anybody had seen that it's tough for him to ever reach that level again. And that's Doc. The 1985 Dwight Gooden season.
Yeah.
Where he goes 24-4 with a 153 REA. He never even approached like that.
Oh,
I know this is a bit unfair, but
yeah.
it's interesting to think about. Like, would you ever classify him because that 1 season was just so otherworldly?
Yeah, I see your point. Right. But I guess the insinuation is that the guy wasn't good.
No, and Doc was good.
He just wasn't that good. Yeah. Just like had DeGrom finished his season this season, it might have looked compared to even other DeGrom seasons.
Yeah. Except DeGrom had like a couple Cy Youngs in his back pocket. Right. That.
So you can't really do.
I didn't really. He threw 16 complete games that season, 8 shutouts.
When it wasn't happening as much, I think that's the thing. It even then, complete games had already become a commodity.
What was it like watching that season? Was it like this season with DeGrom, where it was just every 5 days it was Dwight Gooden day?
And it's just every pitch the guy threw, right? He really threw 3 pitches, but 2 primarily. He had his fastball and his curveball, of course.
Uncle Charlie,
or as Tim McCarver would call it when he really threw a good one, Lord Charles. That was that good a curveball. So that's kind of DeGrom-like in terms of the way
of just like you could not
was
hit
so
him.
Good, and he could just I'm going to throw the high fastball. It's going to come right now. Here you go, and the batter knew it was coming, couldn't hit it.
That's got to be the best feeling in the world as a pitcher.
Such a dominant pitcher, but no,
he would
not in this category.
Never classify that. The same way you wouldn't classify Bonds as a 1-season wonder for hitting 73 home runs that 1 season.
And I don't know. I guess Michael Morse and Dominic Brown are the 2 more recent guys,
right?
But they're a while ago now. It's almost
there haven't been a lot of.
I wonder if scouting's better and it's easier to sort of see the holes in the guy. Forget about injuries, right? That's a whole different thing.
I think also scouting is better, and you're unlikely to have guys that undiscovered talent like that.
Yeah.
The only way you're probably going to get them are rookies that have an unbelievable rookie season and then either get hurt or there was some flaw that nobody had noticed.
We talked about it in our Silver Sluggers. I think the movie The Scout.
Yeah.
So always looking for Kong, right?
Yeah.
That player who you just you discover. It's really hard to do that today
because it's like once you find your Kong, it doesn't matter. Everybody believe you can find another.
So they also know what you can't do as well.
And then you look at it, and we kind of talked about this previously with the teams guys looking at iPads breaking down swings in between innings. If you have a hole in your swing, you're not going to get a half season anymore. You're going to get maybe a couple weeks.
Yeah, you're going to be playing in AAA before too long.
Real quick. Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform.
And you can follow us on Twitter at Almost Cool.